Efua lay awake in the silent night, the sound of crickets humming outside their small home in Obwesai. She turned to her husband, Kwame, who was fast asleep beside her. His breathing was steady, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of rest. But as she leaned closer, resting her head on him for comfort, something strange caught her attention. At first, she thought it was her imagination. She pressed her ear against his chest, expecting to hear the familiar steady beat of his heart, the sound that always made her feel safe. Instead, she froze. There was not just one heartbeat. There were two distinct rhythms, pulsing inside one body. Her breath caught in her throat, and she quickly pulled back, her eyes wide in the dim moonlight. She sat up, staring at Kwame's peaceful face. He was still, unaware of the terror growing inside his wife. She whispered his name, gently shaking his shoulder, but he stirred only slightly, murmuring something before turning to his side. The sound faded as he moved, but the memory of it remained clear in Efua's ears. 2 hearts. She was sure of it. Her mind raced. How could it be possible? Was she losing her senses? Efua placed her hand on her own chest, feeling her own heartbeat racing as if it wanted to leap out of her body. She hesitated, then leaned closer again. There it was. One beat after another, strong, firm, and impossible to mistake. Not an echo, not an illusion. 2 living heartbeats inside the man she thought she knew better than anyone. Efua's skin prickled with fear. She pulled the blanket tightly around herself and stared into the shadows of their room, too shaken to close her eyes. Questions filled her mind, and none had answers. Was her husband hiding an illness? Or was this something far more terrifying, something she could not explain? That night, Efua did not sleep. She listened, waiting for the dawn, her ears haunted by the sound of 2 hearts beating where only one should be. The following day, Efua tried to shake off what she had heard, convincing herself it must have been her imagination. Maybe she was tired, maybe she had pressed her ear too hard against his chest and confused the sound. But as the evening came, her curiosity grew stronger than her fear. When Kwame finally drifted off to sleep, she slowly leaned her head against him again, her heart pounding as she listened. This time there was no mistake. One heartbeat thudded steady, then another followed, different in rhythm, yet just as strong. Efua gasped and sat up quickly, her hands trembling. The room felt colder, her body shivered, and she pressed her palms together as if praying. She could not understand what she was hearing. Was Kwame sick? Could a man carry 2 hearts inside him? Or was this something unnatural? Her mind swirled with possibilities, none of them comforting. She thought of diseases she had heard about, strange conditions that doctors struggled to explain. Yet something inside her whispered this was not sickness, it was something darker. The way the second heartbeat pulsed with strength unsettled her. It sounded alive, as if it belonged to someone else. Efua watched her husband's calm face as he slept, unaware of the storm inside her. She touched his arm gently, wondering if she should wake him and confess her fear. But she could not bring herself to speak. What if he laughed at her? What if he thought she had gone mad? She pulled her knees to her chest, her eyes wide open through the night. The sound would not leave her memory. Even after she moved away from him, she could still feel it echoing inside her ears. By morning, her face was pale and her body weak from sleeplessness. She looked at Kwame and forced a smile, but inside she carried a heavy secret. Efua knew something was terribly wrong, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not pretend it away. The burden of silence grew too heavy for Efua to carry alone. For 2 nights she had heard the strange double beat in Kwame's chest, and it haunted her every waking thought. At last, she decided to tell someone she trusted. One morning, as the sun cast golden light over the dusty streets of Obwesai, Efua met her childhood friend Ajoa at the marketplace. They sat on a wooden bench by the plantain stall, and Efua leaned close, her voice low and trembling as she revealed what she had heard in her husband's chest. Ajoa's eyes widened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she shook her head quickly, pressing a finger to her lips. Efua, you must be careful with such words, she whispered. If people hear this, they will not keep quiet. They will twist your story and spread it. Her warning only made Efua's heart pound harder. She had hoped for comfort, but instead she felt a deeper unease. Ajoa finally leaned closer and spoke in a tone filled with dread. The elders have a saying. If a man carries a second heartbeat, it means he is not living alone in his body. It means something else is inside him, sharing his life. The words sank heavy in Efua's chest. She wanted to dismiss them, but she could not deny how real the sound had been. She tried to cling to reason. Maybe it is sickness. Maybe it is something the doctors can explain, she said, her voice shaking. But even as she spoke, doubt clouded her mind. Ajoa frowned and gripped her hand tightly. Sickness does not make two hearts. This is no ordinary matter. You must think before you tell anyone else. That night, Efua lay awake, torn between the comfort of science and the weight of superstition. One part of her longed to seek medical help, another feared she was facing something far beyond human understanding. Between whispers of tradition and the silence of reason, Efua felt trapped in a storm she could not escape. Efua could no longer keep her fears to herself. Every night she pressed her ear to Kwame's chest, and every night she heard the second heartbeat, strong and undeniable. At last, she begged him to see a doctor. Kwame laughed at first, brushing it off as her imagination, but when he saw the worry in her eyes and the way her hands trembled, he agreed. Together they went to Dr. Menson, the respected physician in their town. In the small clinic, the smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. Dr. Menson welcomed them kindly, but Efua's face showed such tension that his smile quickly faded. She explained in a shaky voice what she had been hearing. The doctor looked doubtful, but out of respect, he asked Kwame to lie down on the examination bed. He pressed the stethoscope firmly against Kwame's chest and listened. His brows furrowed almost immediately. He moved the instrument again, this time slower, more carefully. Then he pulled it away, staring at Kwame in confusion. Efua leaned forward, her heart racing. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. The doctor hesitated before answering. "Yes," he said slowly, his voice heavy with disbelief. "There are two distinct rhythms, two heartbeats." Kwame sat up, startled, but laughed nervously. "That's impossible, doctor. I only have one heart." Determined to find answers, Dr. Menson ordered X-rays and scans. The machines hummed, the images flashed across the screen, and Efua held her breath. When the results came back, the doctor stared at them for a long time. Finally, he shook his head. "Only one heart," he said quietly. "Everything looks normal." Efua felt a chill run through her body. How could two heartbeats exist when the images showed only one? The doctor removed his glasses and rubbed his temples, clearly unsettled. "I cannot explain this," he admitted. "What I heard should not be possible." Efua and Kwame left the clinic in silence. The doctor's words gave no comfort, only deeper mystery. Science had no answer, and that made the fear inside Efua grow even stronger. Word travels fast in Obwesai, faster than fire through dry grass. It began with a careless word from someone who had seen Efua and Kwame leaving the clinic with troubled faces. Soon, whispers filled the air. At the marketplace, women selling yams lowered their voices when Efua passed by. Men sitting beneath the palm trees paused their laughter whenever Kwame walked near. What started as curiosity quickly turned into fear. Some said Kwame was possessed, that a spirit had entered him and was beating inside his chest. Others whispered darker tales, claiming he carried the soul of an unborn twin who had never left his body. They recalled old stories from the elders, tales of men cursed to share their flesh with another spirit. The more the rumors spread, the less people wanted to be near them. Efua noticed the change everywhere. Friends who once greeted her warmly now crossed the road to avoid her. Children who used to run up to Kwame now hid behind their mothers. At night, Efua heard voices outside their window, neighbors murmuring about the strange man with two hearts. Fear had wrapped itself around their home, squeezing tighter each day. Kwame tried to ignore it, but Efua saw the pain in his eyes. He worked with his hands, but even customers at his shop began to stay away, leaving him alone with his tools and silence. "They treat me like I am a ghost," he said one night, his voice heavy with bitterness. Efua held his hand, but her own heart trembled with the same fear. The weight of the rumors pressed on her chest. She wanted to scream that they didn't know the truth, but even she wasn't sure what the truth was. Was Kwame cursed? Was something living inside him? The more she tried to believe in reason, the more the whispers clawed at her mind. Obwesai had turned cold against them, and Efua realized they were no longer just fighting a mystery in his chest, they were fighting the judgment of an entire village. Efua began to notice changes in her husband that frightened her more than the whispers of the village. At first, it was small things, Kwame talking in his sleep, murmuring words she could not understand. His voice would shift, deeper and harsher, as if it did not belong to him. She would shake him awake, but he would only stare at her in confusion, swearing he remembered nothing. As the nights passed, the strangeness grew. Sometimes he would sit up suddenly in the darkness, his eyes wide open but distant, as though someone else was looking through them. He spoke in tones Efua had never heard before, strange names slipping from his lips. Once, he whispered her name so coldly that chills ran down her spine. When morning came, he had no memory of it at all. One evening, as she prepared supper, Kwame's hand struck the table with sudden force, startling her. His eyes blazed with anger she could not explain, and he shouted words that made no sense. The next moment, he blinked, confusion washing over his face, and he asked why she looked so frightened. Efua realized he did not know what he had just done. The man she loved was there, but something else was pushing through him. Her fear deepened when she noticed how his moods shifted like storms. At times he was gentle, the husband she knew, holding her hand and speaking softly. Then without warning, his face would harden, his voice changing as though another soul was using his body. Efua listened at night, her ear against his chest, and the second heartbeat seemed stronger than before, pulsing with a rhythm that did not belong. It was then she understood. The heartbeat was no longer silent. It was no longer hidden. Whatever lived inside Kwame was beginning to take control, and she was powerless to stop it. Efua lay awake, terrified, knowing the man beside her was not fully her husband anymore. Efua could no longer bear the fear that filled her nights and the silence that pressed on her days. Kwame was slipping away from her, and the strange force inside him was growing stronger. With nowhere else to turn, she went to see Nana Corker, the old spiritual elder who lived at the edge of Obwesai. The path to her hut was narrow, lined with thick trees that whispered in the wind, and Efua's steps were heavy with dread. Nana Corker welcomed her with knowing eyes, as though she had been expecting her. The elder's hut smelled of herbs and burning incense, the walls lined with carved figures and old charms. Efua sat before her and poured out the story, the double heartbeat, the strange voices, the sudden violence, and the fear that consumed her home. Nana Corker listened in silence, nodding slowly, her face grave. At last, she spoke. "Child, what you have seen is no sickness of the body. It is older, deeper. Kwame's family carries a curse that has been hidden for many years. A jealous ancestor once called on spirits for power, but the price was heavy. 2 spirits were bound into one body, trapped together for all time." Efua's breath caught. "You mean, Kwame is carrying another life inside him?" Nana nodded solemnly. "Yes, 1 body, 2 souls. 1 heartbeat is his, the other belongs to the spirit that was never freed. It has lived with him since birth, growing stronger as he grows weaker." Efua felt her stomach tighten. The stories she had once dismissed as superstition now stood before her as truth. She thought of the whispers in the village, the doctor's confusion, the nights of terror. All of it made sense, yet it terrified her even more. Nana Corker placed a hand on Efua's shoulder. "The time has come for the truth to be faced. If nothing is done, the spirit will not only control him, it will consume him." Efua lowered her head, trembling. She knew she could not walk away from this. That night, the village gathered in tense silence outside Nana Corker's compound. The air was heavy with smoke from burning herbs, and the sound of drums echoed through the darkness, deep and steady, like the very heartbeats that haunted Efua. Kwame was led to the center of the circle, his body trembling, his eyes distant as though he was no longer fully himself. Efua stood close by, her hands shaking, but she did not move away. She knew the truth had to be faced. Nana Corker began the ritual, her voice rising in chants that carried through the night air. The villagers joined in, their humming low and fearful. Kwame clutched his chest and fell to his knees, his screams piercing the night. Efua's tears blurred her vision as she rushed forward, but the elder held out a hand to stop her. "Do not interfere," she warned. "The spirit must speak." Kwame's body shook violently, his voice shifting between his own and another deeper, unfamiliar one. His face twisted in pain as the second voice broke through fully. The crowd gasped as words poured from his mouth, not his own but belonging to someone else. "I am Kweku," the voice cried, raw and desperate. "I was never born, yet I have always lived. I am his brother, trapped inside since the beginning." Efua's heart pounded as she listened. The elder nodded solemnly. "The second heartbeat is not a demon. It is his unborn twin, a soul that never found its own body." The villagers whispered in shock, some bowing their heads, others clutching charms against their chests. Kwame's body collapsed against the earth, sweat soaking his clothes, his breaths ragged. The 2 heartbeats thundered within him, one fighting to live, the other fighting to be free. Efua sobbed quietly, realizing the torment her husband had carried all his life. The truth had finally been revealed, but it came with a pain that cut deeper than fear. Kwame lay on the ground, his body trembling, his chest heaving with the weight of 2 lives. The drums slowed, but the chants continued, steady and haunting. Suddenly, his lips moved again, and the voice that came out was not his own. It was deeper, fragile, and filled with fear. "Do not cast me away," it pleaded, echoing across the hushed night. "I have lived here all my life. I am not evil, I only fear the darkness of being forgotten." The villagers shivered at the sound, some stepping back in terror, others leaning forward to listen. Efua's knees grew weak as she stared at her husband, who now seemed both himself and someone else entirely. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You are his brother, his blood, but what am I to do?" The spirit inside Kwame cried out again. "If you free him, I will vanish forever. Let me stay, and we can live as we always have, 2 hearts, 1 body. I beg you, do not take away my only existence." Its desperation cut through the night, wrapping around Efua's heart like chains. Nana Corker turned to her. "The choice rests with you. If the spirit stays, Kwame's life will never be his own. If it is cast out, your husband will be free, but the twins' soul will end." The elder's words pressed heavy on her chest. Efua looked at Kwame, his eyes flickering between his own and the shadow of another, and she broke into sobs. Around her, the village stood in silence, every face waiting for her answer. Her heart pulled in 2 directions, compassion for the lost soul, and love for the man she had promised to protect. The cries of the spirit grew weaker, trembling with fear of death, while Kwame's body convulsed under the weight of the struggle. Efua pressed her hands to her face, tears pouring freely. She knew whichever choice she made, something precious would be lost forever. And the entire village held its breath, waiting for her decision. Efua wiped her tears, her voice breaking as she finally whispered the words that would decide everything. "Set him free." Her choice cut through the night like a blade, and the villagers gasped, some clutching their chests, others shaking their heads in sorrow. The spirit inside Kwame wailed in despair, its voice trembling with fear. "No. Do not let me go. I have nowhere else to live." But Efua's decision was firm, though her heart ached with guilt. She loved her husband too deeply to let him be imprisoned any longer. Nana Corker raised her staff, her chants rising higher, the drums thundering like a storm. Kwame's body twisted violently, his screams mixing with the cries of the spirit. Efua covered her mouth to hold back her sobs, watching the man she loved torn between life and death. Slowly, the sound of the second heartbeat began to fade, weaker and weaker, until at last it stopped altogether. The night fell into heavy silence. Kwame collapsed to the ground, still and unmoving. Efua ran to him, her hands shaking as she held his face, terrified he was gone. Then, with a deep gasp, his eyes opened. This time, they were clear, no longer clouded by another presence. He looked at her with peace, as though a great weight had finally been lifted. Efua held him tightly, crying into his chest, hearing only one steady heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, it was only his. The villagers murmured among themselves, some in awe, others in fear of what had just passed before them. Efua's heart carried both grief and relief. She mourned the lost twin spirit, a life that never truly lived, but she also rejoiced in having her husband back. She realized that love sometimes means letting go of what does not belong, even when it breaks the heart. And as the night ended, the narrator's voice carried the lesson. Some hearts were never meant to beat together, and when truth is buried in silence, it always finds a way to echo.